Hi, everyone. My name is Reba Monachin, and I am Senior Relationship Manager for the Gates Millennium Scholars Program. Hopefully, you all can hear me okay, and you're all doing well on this beautiful evening and late afternoon for some, depending on where you are in the world. I'm here today with Gates Millennium Scholar Jennifer Hune, and I'm going to go ahead and let Jen introduce herself before she gives her presentation today on cover letters.
So, hi, my name is Jen Huynh. I'm a rising senior at Babson College in Massachusetts. And I actually just finished my sixth internship at a corporate company. And I'll be presenting today on cover letters and touching on interviews towards the end. I'll also be presenting some of the cover letters that I worked on that were pretty successful in the process in getting me different internships and job offers. So I'm hoping that some of the stuff that I've learned over the years about cover letters and interviewing will help you guys out today. So shall we get started with the slideshow?
Awesome. Yes. So as Jen sets up, we did a webinar a few weeks ago on resumes, and this is the second installment of our professional development webinars for the month of August as part of the Ask GMS series. So tonight, if you're watching from home, if you hashtag Ask GMS, we will be taking your questions on both Facebook and Twitter, and hoping that you really take this opportunity to listen to the great advice, the great tips, and the great examples that Jen is showing. Because if you have the option to do a cover letter as part of a job search, you definitely should. And that can be the difference between whether you receive that job or whether you don't. It's just another opportunity for you to show your character, your interests, your motivations, your knowledge, skills, and why you are the strongest candidate for a position. So, we'll be having a conversation tonight, and if you continue to have questions, you're always welcome to email us, and also mention your comments and questions on the YouTube page or via the hashtag AskGMS on both Facebook and Twitter. So Jen, take it away.
All right, so the cover letter to the rescue, and sometimes cover letters are what saves you in an interview and job application, because that, as we explain right now, the cover letter is a partner to resume. So once you send in a resume, sometimes a job description will also say that they require a cover letter as well. And the cover letter is a one-page document, typically about one page, that you send with the resume, and it's meant to introduce yourself to the hiring manager. Because as we see in a resume, it's a lot of information about what you've done, what school do you go to, volunteer experience, etc. The cover letter gives you a chance to be more personal with the hiring manager and further explain these different experiences through jobs, volunteering, your passions, etc., why you want this job and why you're the best candidate. And each company, usually you customize your cover letter so that it's catered to them. And you always make sure that as you're writing these cover letters, you can use the same cover letter that you've written previously with a different employer, but make sure that you go back and proofread and that you're addressing the right company, the right hiring manager, you have the right address and date, etc. Because in my experiences, when you cater your resume and cover letter to the job description, they'll see that you're more of a fit because you're what they're looking for. So for example, if your job description is discussing that they want someone who has high organization, they're very detail oriented, and has like web design or Photoshop experience, that you want your cover letter and resume to highlight the experiences that match those different qualifications.
Yeah, and I can't emphasize that enough. I really want to speak to that point that Jen just made. Every employer wants to feel like they are the only employer that you're applying to, and customizing your resume, customizing and personalizing your cover letter is so incredibly important. And I think that that helps you to stand out as a candidate. And I've actually even seen resumes and cover letters that had the wrong employer or wrong position in it. And so it's really important that you do customize it and also pay special attention to detail.
And actually, like for those who might be just fresh out of the college application process, when we're applying for colleges, and in some cases you have to interview or write a separate essay about why you wanted to attend this school. It's the same case where you don't want to be wearing a shirt for a different school to a school that you're interviewing for. It's some of those similar aspects, and we're going to talk about more about some of these different tips because this is on a job and professional level now that you're in college.
Great.
So how do you start? Like, how do you start writing a cover letter? So the cover letter is typically 3 to 5 paragraphs. You're going to start off with the header, which will have your name and how to contact you. So your address, email, phone number, etc. And this header is actually typically, to be professional and detail oriented, should be the same header that you have in your resume that has your contact information. With this information also, one question I've gotten a lot was your address. I'm in college, what address do you use? So some cases you want to use your home address depending on where the location of the job you're applying to is, or you can use your school address if the location of the job you're applying for is closest to your school, because in some cases the employer will also look at the address to see, okay, who's local, who's going to be more easily accessible for us to hire. So that's just something to kind of keep in mind. Then under that, you would have the date that you're sending out the cover letter. And like, for example, if today were the day you were sending out, you would put August 27th, 2015, like fully, don't put a shorthand date. Then under that, you put the mailing address and the name of the company. And you won't actually be mailing them, but because you put the address there, it shows that you know where this company is. And for some companies, they have more than one office as well. So when you want to, say, apply for a job in the New York City office instead of the Washington, D.C. office, you would make sure you put the New York City address instead of the Washington, D.C. one, because that affects where you will be hired. And then you start addressing the letter, dear sir or madam. And when you address the letter, even though it says dear sir or madam in here, you always want to try and find who your hiring manager is. In the job description, sometimes it will say directly who the person you're hiring is. So you want to make sure that you address them to make it, again, personal. Like, that's something that we're going to emphasize a lot throughout this cover letter webinar, that you want to make this cover letter as personal as possible to the company and also for yourself. So the first paragraph of the cover letter is typically the introduction. It answers the question of, who are you? Why are you interested in this internship? How did you find out about this job? Do you know anyone that has worked for our company in the past? So you want to answer these questions in a concise, clear, and personable way. This is where you want to show clearly what your objective is with this letter. And in the middle paragraph, that's when you start talking about highlighting the specific experiences in your resume. So when I say in the same paragraph or paragraphs, because at the very least, you want to highlight 1 to 2 experiences, but no more than 2 to 3. You want to highlight the most important experiences or qualifications that you have using your past experiences, and pick the most important ones so that you're not writing too much. If your cover letter is too long, sometimes the hiring managers who are reading more than one cover letter throughout their process, they might put it to the side and say, okay, this might be too long. They want to get to the point and make sure that they, in a short amount of time, can find out who you are. So you can use 1 to 2 experiences at the least, but 2 to 3 at the most. And in these middle paragraphs, you want to highlight your experiences and refer back to the job description. That's when, for example, when we said that there was web design in a job description, you can go back to a web design class that you took, and you could, as for example, and continue to talk about that experience and what you learned from that class. And some of the biggest part about these middle paragraphs is to talk about how your skills will benefit the company. And that includes avoiding some I statements. So, for example, one way to avoid the I statements is to say, recognizing the need for an associate who has web design experience, I'm someone who can use the experiences from my web design class this past semester to bring new ideas and skills to the company. So you want to discuss your skill sets in a very specific way to the job description. And your last paragraph is pretty much a conclusion, a closing. You want to make sure you thank the employer for their time to be polite and professional, reiterate and emphasize like why you want this job, and then follow up with the employer. So at this point in the process, you can end the cover letter by saying, I look forward to discussing the opportunity. You can contact me at, put your email, phone number, etc. And then also from the job description, if you get the chance to find their phone number and it allows you to call them, you can follow up and say, or you can put in your cover letter that I will be following up with a call next week to discuss this opportunity further. Not every job description will have that, but if you get the chance to, it's definitely a way to stand out because not a lot of people actually do that. And then finally, you have your signature. You end with sincerely, best regards, a nice, polite way to end the letter.
And I really like, Jen, that you emphasize that if you have a resume that you're, or you should have a resume that you are also putting in with this cover letter, having the title, your name, the header be consistent with that, because it does really give a very clean look to have all of your materials look the same. And whereas a resume, there are various formats that you can have for a resume. There's various types of resumes. Cover letters are pretty straightforward. And I think what makes people nervous about them is that it's a lot of writing. But writing is oftentimes a skill that's necessary for many of these jobs that you're applying to. And so an employer is seeing this is their first impression of your writing skills. And so it's really important for you to write well, to be very attuned to the details and customize, just like you were saying.
Mm-hmm. And as Reba was talking about the resume, make sure that the experiences that you talk about in your middle paragraphs are also on your resume, because sometimes if you don't have that matching and correspondence to each other, they might question, oh, where did they say on the resume that they had the web design class or web design experience? Mm-hmm. So make sure that whatever you're saying on your cover letter also matches your resume. And that's why the cover letter is kind of like a partner, because you can say in a bullet on your resume, took a web design class, but you could talk about it further about what you learned using this middle paragraph of the cover letter.
Right. It's a way for you to elaborate.
Mm-hmm. So this is a very general example of what the cover letter looks like once you take away all the bullets and different notes about it. So in this case, Adam Job Seeker is looking for a job and as an associate at a finance department in a company. He explains like who he is in the first paragraph and what his objective is with this cover letter. And this is a very general cover letter. It's very basic, but it gives an idea of like the conciseness of the letter, the different formatting, and just like how one person can relate their experiences to what they're looking for in a finance associate. So in the next slides, I actually do have some cover letters that I've written in the past. And as a senior now at Babson, I've written probably 20 to 25 cover letters. And through the time that I've written them, I've learned a lot. And cover letters are something that definitely takes a lot of practice. And when you practice, you do it by actually doing it and seeing the results of, does someone come back and offer you an interview? Does someone come back and say, like, hey, you got the job? Like, there's different ways of seeing that growth, but I've definitely personally had that growth in the cover letters I've written. So in the next slides, I kind of have some of those examples. So this first one is a cover letter that I wrote during my senior year of high school. Wow, I feel kind of old, but in my senior year of high school, I started looking for internships once I decided what school I was going to attend. And I reached out to my career counselor to ask her how to write a cover letter. And at the time, some of the things that she told me to make sure that I had in my cover letter as a graduating high school senior with no job experience yet was to be concise, to have a clear purpose of what I'm looking for, and to make sure that I note the different qualities that I have as a high school student so that I could be a potential candidate and potentially the best candidate I could be um, at my age of being a high school student. So, I mean, unfortunately, wrote a very general cover letter. So this was one that I kind of cold sent out to a few local companies in the area, and it's a very general cover letter, which is what I would approve on. I did get hired into a a paid internship as a result of this cover letter. However, like I looking back on it now, like almost 4 years later, I can definitely see that I could have been more specific. I could have asked my career counselor for more information about the companies she was helping me get this cover letter sent to and make it more personal in that case. And I also didn't have any kind of heading or formatting on the cover letter for me to be a little more professional. It got me through, but I definitely could have been more professional. And I hope that for anyone who's doing their very first cover letter, I can share with you guys that the heading is something that makes it very consistent and professional. And you want to make sure that to get yourself through the door, you want to have the very specific things to the job description. In this case, I didn't have a job description or a company, but I could have asked for that information.
I also want to point out, though, one really great thing that you did is you talked about you didn't have that much work experience, it sounds like, at this point. So you talked about your volunteer experience and your leadership experience. And a lot of folks, when they are going through a job search, they forget about that experience and they think that it doesn't qualify as something that they should add because it's not paid. And that is the furthest thing from the truth. I think that there are so many different experiences that we don't get paid for, but are huge leadership experiences and our volunteer experiences that give us leadership skills. And so I think that probably was one of the reasons that you did stand out as a high school student.
Mm-hmm. And I think one of the things that my career counselor told me at the time was also companies want someone who's responsible in their community too, not just in the workplace or academically, but someone who took the time out of their schedule to not get paid for some of these experiences that you've had. Like when I was in high school, I was an AFS volunteer, and that was a lot of doing presentations and going around my community doing work without getting paid. And I think that was something that was noted when I was hired, and they asked me a lot about that experience. And especially when there's kind of that phenomenon that some people might ask, like for me to get a job, I have to have job experience, but for me to get a job experience, I need to get my first job. Sometimes that first job experience comes from talking about the volunteer experiences or academic experiences or extracurricular experiences that you had. So that's a couple of things about like how to do a cover letter on the very first time. So the second cover letter that I'm showing here is one that I wrote during my sophomore year of college. And this time you may not be able to see it here, but I addressed the hiring manager directly and gave the specific address of this company. I talked a lot about my passions and why this specific position was something that I really related to. Like I remember this was a position to do marketing with a nonprofit company, and this nonprofit company I was really passionate about because I was someone who wanted to be in social impact and use my business skills to be a communications and marketing intern for them. So I highlighted specific skills such as being a marketing intern for a previous company, having my skills and the different jobs I had. And I also talked about the passion that I have for social work or for the volunteering I do for the Gates Millennium Scholarship Program. So I highlighted a lot of experience and I connected it to the company and their specific job description. However, like as you can kind of see, this is kind of a longer letter. It fit on a one page, but I do remember actually playing a lot with the margins to make it fit on one page. So it's a longer letter. It has 2 middle paragraphs instead of one. And I think the biggest thing that I saw that I could have done differently was that I didn't focus on how I could have benefited the organization. So if we look deeper at some of the writing I used, what could have been like, I was good that I talked about that my career counselor showed me this opportunity, and that the skills that I have were as an enthusiastic, entrepreneurial, and creative, detail-oriented leader. But then even though I give like specific skills and experiences that were related to the job description, I kept kind of talking more about myself than the actual company. And like, for example, the bullet here about like what I do with the student engagement team, or my leadership roles in my business fraternity, like that, those seemed like they were very list-like and just kind of something that I threw in there just to say, oh, look, I'm involved. And then down here, I talk about, yes, that this internship would really benefit my personal growth, but there's very little that I say in here about what can I do to benefit the company. I say earlier, entrepreneurial, creative, and detail-oriented leader, but I don't directly relate it. It's there, but cover letters are also need to be very clear, because they're not gonna necessarily call you up and ask you to follow up saying, hey, we weren't sure, like, can you talk to us more? They won't do that until the interview, but they won't do that for the cover letter process necessarily. And I think one thing that I didn't include in here, but maybe I should have talked about more, were group work and team projects, because no matter what position you're going to apply for, there's always going to be some team aspect or a group work aspect nowadays. So that's something that I could have included in this cover letter. All right. Slide's not moving for some reason.
One thing I wanted to add was that Jen mentioned that in this cover letter it was kind of long, and she kind of moved the margins to keep it to one page. And I think that it's a good idea to keep it around one page so that folks don't see that it's too wordy. They don't feel that they're taking too much time on the cover letter, because honestly, a hiring manager is only going to look at your materials potentially for 30 seconds to a minute, because they're getting in so many applications. So you really want your cover letter to be both succinct as well as impactful. And even though there are probably 5 to 10 skills that you want to highlight, it's important to keep it to a font size that is also manageable. If I am a person who has to squint to see the words on your cover letter, that's going to annoy me, and I'm not going to be happy about reading your cover letter. And you never want someone to be annoyed when they're reading your cover letter. So the length that Jen has this cover letter is a good length, and I wouldn't go any further than this or any smaller than this font.
Mm-hmm. And the font size I used for this one, I remember, was like 11 and Calibri, maybe 10, but never go below 10 for font size. And the font usually should also match the resume as well. So my last example is actually the latest cover letter that I wrote for my most recent summer internship. So the improvements that I had from sample number 2 was that I tried to make it more concise and more like straight to the point about like who I am, what did I do, and I have specific statements in there about showing what I could do to benefit the company and the job based on the job description. And I wanted to make sure that I have very universal qualities. And even though this was like the most recent one that I've written and that I was hired for the position, there's always growth. So like after writing 20 to 25 cover letters as an undergrad student, I know that as I'm gonna write more cover letters to apply for full-time jobs or write statements to apply for grad school, like I want to make sure that I do better. So like, and even for this one, I wanted to make sure that I was more specific to the position description, and I could have mentioned more about what I knew about the company, because honestly, I think I did a very quick Google search and did very basic details on this cover letter. But different. The more research you do on the company, the better. And I actually had a friend who did extensive research on the company and gave all the different issues that he noticed about the company based on like news articles, different stock market tickers on the company. And he mentioned how he could use his skills to benefit the company in his cover letter, hired right away, and they were like blown away by it. So do anything that will get you on the extra mile. So, and for this cover letter, I specifically put in more statements to benefit the position and the job description. I talked more about the group work because I always like to talk about my international experience and how that relates to working with other people. And I have basically in here 3 very clear statements that talk about how I contribute to this global supply chain internship program that I got to do this summer. And even here, I talk about what I suggested earlier of if I have questions, contact me at this email or this phone number, and thanking the employer. So a lot of the improvement that I focused on for this one is to make sure that there's that statement in there about what are you going to do to benefit the company. Because even though I have those statements, I still also have like what do I do in different positions in the past that would relate to the company or relate to good business qualities in general. So, and also there's a new style called bulleted cover letters. What I just discussed in the previous slides of the PowerPoint were the traditional cover letter. In this case, the bulleted cover letter, it's very similar in terms of the content that you have in the cover letter. However, there's the main difference is to have the bullet points that highlight what skills that you have related to the job description. It puts headlines almost on each paragraph so that the reader will just, if they only have time to just read the bullets, they'll know that, for example, I'm using the most recent cover letter I did on sample 3 in this one. If someone had just the time to read the bullets on here, they would see entrepreneurial, problem solver and communicator, global and multicultural mindsets. And that's what they would get. If they want to know more, they could read the paragraph that I have under it or like that further highlights it. So, and I actually, when I redid my cover letter in this format, it made it a lot more concise, making it more open for me to either make it a bigger font or to make sure that I'm really hitting the point and that whoever's reading my cover letter will be able to read it faster and get who I am sooner. And okay, so those are my tips on cover letters so far. And I guess if there are people who have questions.
Great. Those are all really great points, Jen. I think the one thing that I would also add, you talked about passions and being able to talk about your passions. That's often a question that I get from scholars, whether they should include certain things on their cover letter. How do you decide what to include on a cover letter when you have so many different things that you do want to include, and some of them are your passions?
So you want to make sure that the passions and interests are relevant to the job. So I applied to a few public health and educational internships before. And on the ones for education, I would talk a lot about how being a Gates Millennium Scholar and doing presentations as a Gates Millennium Scholar Ambassador really sparked my passion for educational access and opportunity and connecting students to different opportunities. And that's something that I would include, not just as an experience, but also a passion. So if you have things that you've been involved in that are part of your passion, include that too, if they're related to the job description, because that's why you're applying for the job. You're looking for a job in that case that is related to your passion so that you enjoy and love it and put everything. And like having that passion will show them that you want to throw your all into this because this is something that you will put all the effort and time into. And then you can have it fit with the job description and write it so that it's concise, and you can continue even talking about it if you're offered an interview.
That's great. And so what do you think are some of the worst cover letter mistakes that people make?
So some of the worst cover letter mistakes are actually something that I had in mind, like not in a past one that I wrote one in the past. Talking more about your successes and not backing up why you want to be part of this job or organization. I've also seen some cover letters where people forget to customize it to the job description, and they kind of just talk more about their skills very generally without relating it to what the job is looking for. They don't really thank the employer, or they don't note that they want to follow up with them. And if they have like a weak opening, it doesn't really say, it doesn't really show their interest, because that first paragraph is kind of like a first impression too, because you're talking about who you are, why you're interested in this job. So you want that first paragraph to be just as strong as the rest of the paragraphs that talk about your experiences.
Sure. And so we talked about resumes last week. We're talking about cover letters this week. Which one do you believe is more important?
They're actually both important. They're important in different ways. So the resume is a summary that's focusing more on, excuse me, the bullets of what you've done in the various positions that you've done. And that can be anything on the academic level, your classes, your previous job experience, volunteer experience, and skills. Like it's kind of like a list. And it shows that breadth of your experience if you have that. Whereas the cover letter, you get to give more detail about the bullet points on your resume that are very related to your job description. And it gives you a chance to be more personable than just looking at a sheet of paper of what school I attend or what school or what stuff I've done in school or my jobs. So the cover letter is more personable, and that's why that's important. So they're both really important, and it's important to spend time on both of them and to customize both of them. Like in some cases, like for a resume, I've actually had to redo the resume and reformat it so that the experience that I've listed fit the job description as well. And that's the same for the cover letter.
And one person asked, should I include salary information in my cover letter?
Salary information. I've actually never had to write a cover letter that has asked me for a salary information. I honestly don't think it would be something to include. That's usually a follow-up discussion for if they want to hire you, what your salary requirements are. Like that's a follow-up conversation, not something that you kind of just put out there saying, like in your cover letter, hey, because I've had these experiences, I think I need to be paid $25 an hour. Like that's not something that, I don't think that's actually too professional to, unless they actually ask specifically to put that in there.
Yeah, some companies will ask you for salary requirements. And so in that case, that is something that you would attach to your materials, whereas other companies will not mention that. And in that case, I don't think that a cover letter should include salary requirements. In some instances, it may not hurt you, but that's not typically something that I do see when I am hiring for various positions. And so that's something that is, however, possible that they may ask in your first interview, if not later on in the interview process. Some companies want to know that at the point that you do get an interview. And so our next portion of this webinar is to also talk about interviews. But before we do that, one last question. How should I follow up after submitting my cover letter and resume?
So following up, if the company provides a phone number and that they state that if they provide a phone number, you can call up within a week of sending your cover letter to see just to introduce yourself, and if you have any questions, to ask those questions as well. Some job descriptions or companies might actually note that you can't call, so just make sure that you take that note into consideration. You can follow up if the company has a Twitter, you can actually follow them and tweet at them any questions you have or any comments you have relating to the industry. And other ways that I would follow up are just to send an email thanking them for letting you apply, and that you like kind of that last paragraph again in the cover letter, just to say thank you, I've submitted my application. If you have any questions, this is the email that you can contact, so that it's easier for them to hit reply if they do end up having a question or want to talk to you about an interview.
Yeah, and I've heard folks say that they had a callback, they had an initial interview even, and a hiring manager has said, I'll get back to you by this date. I would not necessarily contact them until the date that they give, because that is their timeline. And so I know that the job search process can be very anxious, but different employers are on very different timelines. Some may be doing a very fast search, some may be taking multiple weeks or even months sometimes to do the hiring. So don't get nervous if you don't get a response immediately. I have heard from companies literally months after I turned in a resume or cover letter, and the same with my colleagues.
Yeah, and like I've actually had the same where I would put in an application in like August before my junior year, and I'd hear back in January of that junior year.
Yeah,
So
it really
it
just
may take a couple
depends.
months.
Yeah.
And
So
usually you can contact them or look on the website to see what their typical job timeline is, and that's actually a good question to ask as you're applying as well.
Great. So let's go to the second portion. Just a quick few tips on interviews. We know that the resume and cover letter are your opportunity to shine on paper, but the interview is your first opportunity to really be able to talk about yourself to the employer, your first impression in person. And so we wanted to give a few quick tips. We'll be doing another webinar in some time about interviewing specifically, how to prepare for that, and hopefully you'll be able to tune in for that lengthier portion at that time.
Yep, so here we have some interviewing tips, and like the interview would be the next step once you have a successful cover letter. So one of the first things is to always research the company you're interviewing with. Like I mentioned earlier, my friend who had done his research on the company using the news articles, stock market, everything under the sun, it shows that you took the time to be up to date and should see what's going on with the company. It shows your research skills and like that you know what's happening today in this industry, and that you can help out with what's going on in today's world in that industry. So for example, in my summer internship, I had to be up to date with a lot of aerospace, a lot of manufacturing news, and there was a lot of news actually over the summer. There's lots of news over the summer. So even when you're in the position, you're going to need to know that information as well. So it's good to show during the interview that you know that information already, and that you're going to be able to keep up to date if you're continuing and will accept an offer with that position. Before you go into the interview, always know your resume, cover letter, and yourself, because you're going to be going through the information that they know on the resume that you sent them and the cover letter that you sent them. So you want to make sure that you know what you put in there, and that you're not talking about something that maybe isn't relevant to the job description. So make sure that you know front and back your resume. One of the first questions that I usually get when at the beginning of an interview is, tell me about yourself. And then you have to be prepared to talk about yourself, but in relation to the resume and cover letter that you've given, and anything else that's relevant to the job description. Or another question is, walk me through your resume. And sometimes I've been asked that question without a resume in front of me. Granted, you will. It is a good idea to bring the resume with you, but you shouldn't be looking down the whole time at the resume as you walk yourself through the resume to the interviewer. So you always want to review your cover letter and resume before the interview, so you can make references to what you've already shared and what the company will want to know more about. So in relation to In
Yeah,
relation
Jen,
to that, you wanna. Oh,
I want to
continue.
just add one portion to that. So it's actually really funny. When I was younger and applying to a legal position before I got into student affairs, I was asked about one of the extracurricular activities that I participated in that had absolutely nothing to do with the actual legal position. So you'll be surprised sometimes by what the employers do ask you about, because sometimes they don't necessarily directly have to do with the skills and experience of that job, but sometimes they do indirectly. So that extracurricular activity spoke to my presentation skills, spoke to my communication skills, both oral and written communication skills. So it's important to know that not necessarily every experience is what is blatantly directly that from that experience related in your resume or cover letter.
Mm-hmm. Yep, and then they'll likely look at your resume prior to your interview, so they can ask anything there, but you should know it as well so that they know that you took the time to review too. And again, like you're gonna, one good practice that I've always done is to print out a few copies of my resume to have on hand with me to give to them at the beginning of the interview. And and even if you have it in front of you, you don't want to keep looking at it throughout the entire time. You want to be looking at them and showing and having a conversation. The next tip is about first and last impressions. The first questions you're asked and about tell me about yourself and walk me through a resume. Those are part of the first impression that you give to the interviewer. But then the lasting impression is important too, because you don't want to do something that will leave a lasting impression that you don't want to have with the interviewer. So one of the ways to alleviate that is to always make sure that you don't. This is not just an interview for the interview to see if the company can see you as a fit, but also you want to ask questions to them to see if you are a fit for the company as well, to make sure that what you want out of a company is also shown through this position as you ask more questions. So always be prepared to ask at the interview to have some questions on hand. So some questions, general questions that I have like in my pocket at the end of an interview are usually, what's the day in the life in the position of blank? Or how did you get to the position you are in now? Because interviewers and people in general love to talk about themselves. So if you ask that question, they'll give you kind of they'll have to answer that question and pay attention too, because that's important things to know. Like if you run into them in the future, if you actually get the position, that you'll remember, hey, this person came to the company because when they were in college, they also did an internship here. So like just knowing these little facts and they come from asking these questions. Or what's the company culture like at blank company? So the more specific you are actually, like from doing your research, the better. So if you're asking questions about their stocks, some of the news events that have been related to the industry or to the company's news, like those are even better. So ask as many questions as you need, because they want you to feel that you're a fit too, that you'll feel like you'll fit with the company culture.
Yeah, as many as you have time for. Another one is what does success look like in this position? And that's a really good way to gauge what are the priorities for the individuals at this organization. Maybe you're interviewing with your supervisor. So for your potential supervisor, what does success look like for someone in the position? And if that doesn't align with what you are expecting, that is really telling for whether this is the right fit for you or not. I was also going to say, with the first and last impressions, that first question, like Jen mentioned, is pretty typical for any interview. And it's really important that you practice that first question. So you may want to talk about your passions. Are your passions relevant to the position? You may want to talk about your background and your skills and experience. Are you also being personal while you're doing that? So it's really important to practice that and say that over and over and be confident about who you are and what you're there for when you are doing that, because it does really leave a lasting first impression.
And some of you may actually know that first question, tell me about yourself, as the elevator pitch or 30-second commercial. Like that is really what that question is. That's when you can use that 30-second commercial. So if you get the chance, like write some things down that you know you want to cover in that interview. Write down some bullet points and like think about them before the interview. Just make yourself prepared so that you're ready to answer that question confidently and relevantly to the position. So, and then the next tip is that body language makes a difference. Like there's a saying that I've learned in a lot of the different professional trainings I've done called perception is reality. And that's because like the person that they perceive is like the person they know you as. They may not know much more about you other than that first 30 seconds of what they perceive about you. So the first 30 seconds of walking in, the way you dress, these are all the things that you don't say directly, but they make an impression on the interview as well. So the way you dress, the confidence you have, gestures, your handshake even, all are part of that impression. So that's why it's always important to dress appropriately and professionally if you're doing an in-person interview. Shake hands, sit up straight, show that you're attentive. In some cases, I sometimes ask if I can take notes so that I can make sure that I'll ask the interviewer if I'm allowed to take notes so that I can keep track of like what they're saying, and it shows that I'm paying attention. And like if for some who have done like a college interview, like to get into a specific college, some of the same rules apply, that you want to show to the interviewer that you're interested in the college. Same with the company interview, that you want to show that you're interested in this company, you're attentive, and you're making good eye contact and gestures that'll like show your professionalism.
Yeah, and if I can go back to also the dress and your appearance in terms of body language, it's really important that whatever you're doing is not distracting. And so regardless of whether that is dress or the way that you present yourself, whatever that may be, it's really important that even if you're wearing cologne, make sure that the cologne isn't so strong that when you walk into the room, it's distracting. Whatever that is, it's really important that they are able to focus on you, who you are, and what you're saying. And so if you're wearing a suit, that's great. Is your suit fitting? Is it comfortable? Is it appropriate for the attire that's necessary in that office? If you are shaking hands with that person, are you giving a good firm handshake? Are you presenting yourself in the way that is showing that you're confident? And a lot of this just goes back to confidence. It's really important that you walk into that room and you are confident, because you are the best you that you can be.
Mm-hmm. Actually, that makes me think of a funny story that one of my mentors told me, that when he was interviewing someone for his position, he was so nervous and not that confident. He was moving his hands around, and after the interview, his impression was, man, that guy's hands were getting ashy. So like even like the little things, it's just important to go in there confidently and be in control of like the different motions that you're making, and that it's not distracting. And then the final tip is something that I've definitely done a lot more of recently with the different internships I've had, is to follow up and say thank you. There's a lot of ways to do that. Like you say thank you, obviously, at the end of the interview, shaking their hand and walking out. But you want to follow up as well, more than just doing that. So what I usually have done is that within 24 hours of the interview, sometimes on my phone, like right as I walk out, I email the interviewer saying thank you for taking the time to interview me and interview me and consider me for the position in this company. And it's important to, when I said listening was important earlier, that's when you can mention some of the things that they said in the interview that you remember. Like, it was nice hearing that you used to be an intern at this company, and I hope that I can follow that same path if I'm offered the position. So within 24 hours, you want to follow up and email back, just like thanking them and showing that your appreciation, even if whether you get the position or not. But in most cases, that's what makes the difference sometimes. Yeah, in most cases, that's what makes a difference. And what I also have started to do is to write handwritten thank you notes as well. And they take longer to get to the interviewer, but they're a good additional gesture if you have the time and you have the thank you cards available to send those out and mail them to the person you interviewed. Because that's like showing that you put in the extra time to do that and to thank them. Like even at my most recent internship, when I gave thank you cards, they were like really appreciative. If I'd given a thank you card earlier in the internship, I saw that it was sitting on their desk like right there. So like thank you cards, no matter where you are and starting with the interview, like that's going to be memorable, because the goal with an interview is to be positively memorable and confident.
Yeah, and I think that it may or may not make a difference in terms of to that employer whether they get a thank you card or not. Because if your content and what you're saying is a perfect fit for what they're looking for, then if you don't write a thank you card, that's okay. But it may be the reason that they think of you, and it may be between you and one other candidate, and it may be the thing that puts you over the top. And as Jen said, it's important to stand out in a positive way, so that you see so that they see that you are the strongest candidate for the position.
Mm-hmm. Yep, and like we think about the job timelines. Like if they're hiring within the next week, and they get that letter, like, oh, look at that letter from Reba. Like she interviewed last week. I remember that interview, and it's a good thing. But at the very least, you want to make sure that you have the email follow up as well. That you send that email saying thank you for interviewing, so that they know that like right after, like you were ready to send the email, and that you're a prompt person. That within 24 hours you'll reply back, that you'll follow up. But that's an important part of all jobs too.
Yeah. And when you're sending that email, it's important to not just say thank you for the interview, but if you have specific examples of why you thought that this interview solidified your experience, you're solidified the reason that you want to be in this position, that's also a good thing to note in that email to show that you are still interested, that now you're even more so interested now that you know more about the position, and now that they know more about you, hopefully they're feeling the same way.
Mm-hmm. All right, so those are my interview tips in relation to a cover letter, because with a successful cover letter, you're going to get an interview offer, and you want to talk about those things more in detail. And from that point, because you focused on maybe 1 to 2 examples, now in an interview, you can think about more examples too that maybe weren't in the cover letter to even talk about.
Mm-hmm. And in one of our upcoming interview or professional development leadership webinars, I hope that we'll also talk about interview prep, or possibly some other topics, maybe the 30-second elevator conversation that Jen was talking about. So if there are other topics that you all are interested in that you would like for us to see and like for us to talk about and like for us to get scholars and alumni involved, please definitely let us know through the YouTube comments, or by doing the hashtag, by hashtagging on both Twitter as well as Facebook, AskGMS. Jen, any final comments for you?
I just hope that this cover letter webinar was able to help anybody who's like working on a cover letter. I know I have a few friends who were saying like, wow, I actually just realized I've never written a cover letter before. And hopefully like my reflection on some of the cover letters I've written in the past and the practice I've done then helped out. So if there's any more questions about cover letters, you can tweet AskGMS and Reba will somehow get them to me.
Yes, and we really appreciate you joining us today, Jen. This has been very informative, and I really appreciate you taking the time out of your schedule to provide this presentation to all of our scholars, especially those who have never written a cover letter, but even those who have written some and maybe are currently doing the job search. The job search is never fun. It's never a good time. It's always a little bit tense or hectic if you are trying to find something new. And we understand that, and we're hoping that some of these tips will help you to stand out in your job search so that you all can fulfill your own passions. So I will leave you with that tonight, and appreciate all of those who watched in real time. And if you weren't able to watch today in real time, we will be available on the YouTube channel, on the Gates Millennium Skull YouTube channel. So please definitely check us out, and everyone have a good night.
Yep, thank you, Reba, for the opportunity to pay it forward and share my skills with everyone. And thank you, everyone, for watching. So have a good night.
Thanks. Good night.